Welcome to the deep dive. Today we've got a pretty fascinating stack of source material in front of
I
us.
do.
We're looking at high-level analyses from strategists like Colonels Lawrence Wilkerson and Douglas McGregor, geopolitical thinkers like John Mearheimer, and even economists like Yanis Varoufakis.
And we're using all these different viewpoints to really dissect two huge global flashpoints.
Right. The aggressive U.S. stance on Venezuela on one hand, and then the economic chaos coming out of Europe's financial war with Russia on the other.
Our mission today really is to distill what all this tells us. I mean, are we watching the end of the so-called rules-based order? Or is this something else?
Kind of desperate scramble to hold on to power.
Exactly. By connecting the dots between, military threats in the Caribbean and asset seizures in Brussels, a clear theme starts to emerge. We are speeding toward a tripolar world.
Okay, let's unpack that. I think we should start with the more visceral example, the military pressure. Let's start with the Venezuela crucible.
Good place to start.
The sources confirm the U.S. president was, ready to announce a full-scale invasion, and we only know because of congressional leaks.
Which is incredible in itself. But the buildup to that point was pretty extreme.
It was. We're talking about seizing an oil tanker on the high seas, 100 million barrels of oil.
And crucially, reports of up to 99 deaths of non-combatants during these incidents on the high seas.
So what's key here from a legal perspective is that a line was crossed, right?
A huge line. According to the experts looking at this, including Colonel Wilkerson, a naval blockade of Venezuela, which is what this is, effectively, is universally defined under international law as an act of war.
An act of war, not just a tough sanction.
No. This is a direct violation of the UN's own founding principles. It's a very different category of action.
So if it's legally an act of war, what was the justification? What was the official line?
The official line, as reported, was the president saying Venezuela stole our oil and stole our land.
Which refers to the nationalization of U.S. corporate property decades ago.
Decades ago, yeah. But political scientists, they all push back on this. Oil is a natural resource. It belongs to the sovereign state, not a corporation, regardless of old contracts. So the rationale feels less legal and more strategic.
Okay, so this brings us to this term that keeps popping up in the sources, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What does that actually mean for our listeners?
It's basically a total reassertion of U.S. control over the Western Hemisphere. It's like the old Monroe Doctrine, but with a modern military-first kind of edge.
And the real goal isn't just about oil, then?
Not at all. It's about geography. It's about influence. The objective is to aggressively expel Russian and, most importantly, Chinese investment and influence from Latin America.
And China's presence there is significant.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Massive trade deals all over the region, the construction of that new megaport in Peru. Washington sees these things as existential threats to its regional dominance.
Because if you let a rival power set up shop in your backyard,
you lose your leverage. So this is a huge geopolitical power play, just sort of wrapped up in a legal fight over resources.
The sources also point to another layer here, the presence of Mossad in Venezuela, which connects this all to Israeli strategic interests in oil access.
It does, and it just shows how many interlocking security and resource agendas are driving this.
Okay, so let's get to the military calculus. The sources say the president prefers air power, right? Clean strikes.
Yeah, pinpoint strikes against Maduro's regime, like we saw in Syria or Iran. Something quick and intimidating, but the risk is immense.
Let's talk about that. The land nightmare, as one source puts it.
The geography alone makes a land invasion a non-starter. I mean, Venezuela is huge. It's the size of Germany, France, and Austria combined.
And it's not open terrain.
Not at all.
Right.
Triple canopy jungle, mountains. The idea of sending in the, 15 to 17,000 troops from Puerto Rico to stabilize the country is just seen as futile. One analyst literally called it a recipe for an endless insurgency.
And then there's the naval risk. Colonel McGregor brings this up.
He does. The existential risk. If Russia and China have supplied Venezuela with serious anti-ship high-velocity missiles, which is entirely plausible, then the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group is suddenly in great jeopardy.
Plus, you have local forces.
Yes. Up to 150,000 paramilitaries from Colombia and Brazil who are reportedly just itching to support Venezuela against the U.S. invasion.
So the military options are limited.
Very limited, and that's why the U.S. leans so heavily on its other big lever, financial warfare.
And that's the perfect transition to our next fault line, the economic fallout. We're shifting from the military club to the financial hammer, and this story starts in Europe.
It does. European leaders voted to seize $15 billion of the $300 billion in frozen Russian central bank reserves.
Mostly held at Euroclear in Belgium.
Right. And this was meant to be this, political masterstroke to help fund Ukraine, but it ran into immediate legal trouble.
Even the Prime Minister of Belgium was warning against it, wasn't he?
He was, raising serious flags about violating fundamental property rights. And he was right, because by doing this, Europe basically shattered the core principle of the post-World War II financial order.
Which is that sovereign property is sacrosanct. It's safe from political seizure.
Exactly. Why is that so damaging? Because countries all over the world, the global south, the BRICS nations, they hold trillions in Western banks because they believe that money was safe no matter what.
And this action just proved that belief wrong.
It proved that your money is only safe if you toe the Western policy line. It destroyed the neutrality of Western banking, a huge crisis of confidence.
And the Russian retaliation, as Yanis Varoufakis lays it out, was swift. And it came in 3 pretty devastating waves.
Wave 1 was simple tit for tat.
Reciprocal asset seizure.
Right. Russia nationalized over $120 billion of European corporate assets inside Russia. We're talking Shell, BP, Total Energies, whole Volkswagen and BMW plants.
So Europe's move to get $15 billion instantly cost their own companies 8 times that amount.
At least.
Yeah.
It was a massive financial loss right out of the gate.
Ouch. Okay, and wave 2. That was currency weaponization. It targeted the euro itself.
It did. Russia announced that all remaining energy it sold to Europe would have to be paid for in rubles or yuan.
Ah, so they didn't have to cut off the supply.
They didn't have to. They just forced Europe to sell euros to buy rubles or yuan. And that creates constant selling pressure on the euro, while at the same time, it boosts the international use of their own currencies. It's a structural attack.
And wave 3 was maybe the most strategic long-term move, the creation of a whole new financial architecture.
This is the BRICS Plus Reserve Fund. It started with a $150 billion pool. But the size isn't the point.
It's the function.
It's the function. It offers seizure-proof custody for sovereign assets. It's an explicit alternative to Western central banks, designed to attract capital from countries that now see London and New York as untrustworthy.
So they've created a viable non-Western option for any country worried its reserves could be weaponized. This cost-benefit analysis just looks awful for the West.
It's terrible. Analysts are saying that $15 billion for Ukraine could end up costing Europe $500 to $600 billion over the next decade. From rising bond yields, higher borrowing costs, it's all driven by this crisis of financial confidence they created.
And this problem doesn't just stay in Europe, it spreads to the U.S.
It accelerates the U.S. debt crisis.
Yeah.
Exactly. China is watching all this, and they are dumping U.S. treasuries. They've cut their holdings to the lowest point since 2008.
Down from $1.3 trillion to, what, under $700 billion?
Around $688 billion. From their perspective, why would they fund the U.S. government? It's like financing their own containment. Or as one source put it, financing their own destruction.
And this is all happening when the U.S. financial house is not exactly in order.
The timing couldn't be worse. Annual interest payments on U.S. debt just hit $1.24 trillion.
$1.24 trillion.
That's over 4% of GDP. And that massive number forces you to make drastic cuts to spending foreign aid, defense, everything.
Which brings us perfectly to our final section, the fracturing of alliances and this tripolar shift. The sources say the U.S. has basically accepted this new reality in its latest national security strategy.
The shift is pretty much undeniable now. We're out of the unipolar post-Cold War world. We're in a stable tripolar structure, the U.S., China, and Russia. And the U.S. is just exhausting itself trying to maintain that old global dominance.
Some call that the burden of the hedge. Can you explain what that is?
It's the crushing economic cost of trying to be everywhere at once. A navy in every ocean, bases on every continent, trying to hedge against every possible threat. That strategy is now crippling U.S. finances and forcing really difficult choices.
And we can see those choices being made. The new strategy is all about competing with China.
Right. Spending over $10 billion on arms for Taiwan, for example, and refocusing on the Western Hemisphere.
But the flip side of that is a potential disengagement from old alliances.
Yes. The sources are really focused on the U.S. signaling it might pull back from its NATO security guarantees. We're talking Article 5 and Article 3.
Article 5 being the attack on one is an attack on all.
The bedrock of collective defense. Even hinting at disengagement sends a shockwave through Europe. It makes them feel instantly vulnerable.
But Europe, as we've been discussing, isn't really helping its own cause. Why would the U.S. start to see the EU as acting against its own interests?
It's that boomerang effect.
Yeah.
The EU's maximalist position on Russia has made Europe incredibly vulnerable. Their energy costs have gone through the roof.
I saw a note that China is getting energy at 1/6 the cost of U.S. producers.
Exactly. And meanwhile, you've got politically unstable governments all across Europe.
Yet their leaders, Meretz, Starmer, Macron, they keep pushing this hard line. They see Russia as an existential threat.
They do, even though sources suggest Russia doesn't want a general war and actually holds escalation dominance. So Europe is kind of locked in this narrative that's costing them their stability and economic power, just as the U.S. is pivoting to Asia.
And Russia is just using this time to build up its arsenals.
They're capitalizing on the slow pace, not to win quickly, but to build up massive reserves of missiles and armored vehicles in the rear, preparing for a potential large-scale fight if NATO keeps pushing.
So when you put it all together, the U.S. response to all this pressure, whether it's seizing assets or threatening invasions, is to lead with the military, the club.
And leading with the club is always seen as a sign of weakness. It's what you do when your economic and diplomatic power is fading. These are desperate moves to hold on to dominance against the BRICS coalition, where Russia, China, and Iran are actively building an alternative.
Which brings us all the way back to the start. These aren't isolated incidents. The Venezuela posture, the financial warfare, they're signs of the final phase of an imperial decline.
Yeah, where a power relies on military threats because its financial and industrial foundations are fragile. Trust in sovereign assets is broken. And the global financial system is splitting in two, Western and non-Western.
Which leaves a really provocative final thought for you, the listener, to process. With the U.S. system facing this kind of financial stress and the world order bifurcating, how should other countries see the United States?
Is it still the world's guarantor of stability?
Or, and this is the tough question, is it now seen as a rogue nation? One whose actions, like high-seas killings and asset seizures, are forcing both allies and rivals to organize themselves in opposition. Something to think about as this tripolar world really takes shape.
Thank you for diving deep with us into these crucial geopolitical shifts.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.